Cookie Monster hat, Tyler. What happened to you guys? Oh my God.
All right, it's live. Huh?
So what happened to you guys?
The funny thing is, mine wasn't that long ago. That's just when I had long hair. Somebody just wanted to straighten it. So I was like, all right, go ahead. But yeah, that one of Beefy's ridiculous. Okay. Great. Now that's I read that the wrong way. Beefy's in with the YouTube chat already. He just said, now that's epic. All right. Ready?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. Welcome to the Around the 412 Fantasy Football Podcast, proudly presented by Crowworthy, where winners are serving winners, coast to coast with sports, gambling, and more. You can follow Crowworthy on Twitter at Crowworthy. Visit us at crowworthy.com. You can also check out Crowworthy Pittsburgh City page for podcasts such as this one, blogs, and more. I am Smitty. With me, as always, is my co-host, Donnie Druin. What's going on, my man?
Not too much. Week 2, finally in the books. As a Christian McCaffrey owner, I'm a little bit hurt right now, but, life goes on. So thankfully we have shows like this to kind of talk about different ways we can navigate the circumstances.
That's the word I was going to use, is navigate. We'll try to help navigate people to some wins. If you lost Christian McCaffrey, if you lost Saquon Barkley for the year, there's a lot of injuries that happened in week 2, unfortunately, and some star power that was lost too. So yeah, you're going to be having to be scouring the waiver wire, and we are here to help you figure out where you can still get value. I would say that the running back position was probably the hardest hit when you look at the top of the board, at least, with guys like Saquon Barkley and Chris McCaffrey. Saquon out for the year, Chris McCaffrey, 4 to 6. So yeah, going to be tough. We're going to get into that as soon as I tell you guys about Keith's Barbershop, which is an old-fashioned barbershop. It's located at 180 Brighton Avenue in Rochester, PA. He's open 11 to 7 Tuesday through Friday and 9 to 4 on Saturday. Every Tuesday, there's 5 hours off military personnel, first responders, and nurses. Again, that's Keith's Barbershop, 180 Brighton Avenue in Rochester, PA. So we're going to go over some injury stuff. Of course, we're going to give you our top 5 plays by position for week 3. We're going to give you our waiver wire pickups and a bust and a surprise from each position as well. So yeah, I mean, I guess we can kind of just jump right into it. We kind of alluded to the injuries that we saw happen already. You're a Christian McCaffrey owner. That's obviously a guy that was going number 1 in pretty much every draft. So it's going to be tough for people. You're not going to replicate that production. And, he's not going to finish his RB1 with how much time he's missing. If you're a Christian McCaffrey owner, if you're a Saquon Barkley owner, and I know we're going to talk about some of these names when the waiver wire comes up probably as well, but what are the best ways? What strategy would you have now that you've endured such a devastating injury to try to navigate and salvage your fantasy season?
Yeah, so hopefully the best strategy that you did instill was, number 1, drafting very well. So you did have viable guys on the bench to replace a guy like CMC or Saquon if they did get hurt. So hopefully you either did that, or number 2, you lost in week 2, giving you a higher waiver fantasy priority. Because if you were like me and you had CMC and won this week, you're kind of stuck in this not so awesome predicament. Just in terms of grabbing guys off the waiver wire. And, we talk all the time. You don't win your fantasy league during the draft, but you could definitely lose it. And you mostly win your championships scouring the waiver wire early on in the season. And, what more crucial time than now to absolutely do that? I think it just all depends on the waiver priority. If you have a higher one, you obviously want to go get, the bigger, hotter guys trending. But if you really don't, if you won this past week and you were one of the higher scorers in the league and you're lower on the waiver priority list, one, I think you have to think about the possible replacement options you have on your bench and weigh those against any of the guys on the waiver wire and see if it's worth putting in that priority or not.
Yeah, and, thankfully, pretty much every league that I know of has that IR spot for Christian McCaffrey to go into, so you don't have to drop somebody to pick him up. Unfortunately, in Saquon's case, he's not coming back this season. So, you can just drop him and look for a replacement. Devonte Freeman just signed with the Giants. Curious to see what his role is going to be like there. I think the thing with them, I look at how bad their offensive line is and the fact that Devonte Freeman, who I assume is just going to be like the first and second down back, he's going to be running into a brick wall most of the time because of how bad their offensive line is. I still think Dion Lewis might be the backbone in that backfield just because of what he's going to do from a PPR standpoint. He's going to be the guy catching passes out of that backfield. And to me, that's where the production is coming from that running back position. I mean, we saw it week 1 in the Giants versus Steelers game where Saquon Barkley didn't do much on the ground. Anything that he did do productively was done through the air. And I think that that's going to be the case for the Giants a lot this season. I don't think they're going to be able to run the ball very effectively. Granted, they've had a tough test the first 2 weeks with the Steelers and Bears. We'll see if they can improve on that. With the loss of Saquon Barkley, my guess would be no. But, their offensive line play just doesn't inspire me. Especially the fact that Devonte Freeman, even in, his last couple seasons in Atlanta, he didn't look like the same back. He looked like a guy that was, towards the end of his career and didn't have much tread left on the tires. So to me, I think if you're looking at a back in the Giants backfield, Dion Lewis would be my guy to pick up. But the Carolina backfield, that's where it gets interesting. I mean, we saw Mike Davis, a guy that might come up later in the show. He caught 8 passes out of the backfield. I don't know if he had a single carry, though, in that game. So again, you guys gotta weigh your options. You might have somebody that's better on your bench to play than one of these guys. I mean, don't just make a move just for the sake of making a move. You might be better suited to just find a running back. Maybe you have 3 solid running backs and you're playing one of those guys as your flex. Move that flex guy up into your RB2 spot and then play another receiver in your flex or something like that. Because I know a lot of people, when you see a guy like this go down, you panic and your automatic instinct is just to pick up the next running back in line for that team. But, that's not always the viable option. I think that, you got to weigh your options. Don't just take our word for it. I mean, all the experts will tell you that. And I think that you'll watch it play out as well on the football field when you watch the Giants and the Panthers take the field next. So that's just where I stand on it. Donnie's also, said his piece on it and I echoed pretty much the same things he has. So.
Yeah, I really caution people thinking about picking up a guy like Devonte Freeman, who's going to be officially signing with the Giants sometime within the next 24 hours. If Saquon couldn't run behind that offensive line, I'm not really sure there's another running back in football that can. And then you have the guy like Devonte Freeman coming in, hasn't played a single snap of football this year. I don't doubt his conditioning that he did in the offseason. I don't doubt he wasn't working out. Just being able to gel with the offense, being able to, be able to take 20 to 25 carries a game and still remain upright. That's something that concerns me. I'm not one of those guys that are jumping the gun and try to get a guy like Devonte Freeman on the waiver wire. I'm a little bit cautious, and I'm even a little bit cautious about a guy like Dion Lewis as well. But that's just me. That's my personal opinion on it. I don't think anybody running the football for the Giants is going to be super successful. Even whenever we saw a guy like Saquon, who really wasn't in week 1 and week 2 before he got hurt as well. The Panthers backfield is a little bit more interesting, given they don't have a dynamic quarterback throwing the football, and a guy like Teddy Bridgewater. So while I think the Panthers receivers might be a little bit more beneficial from Christian McCaffrey being out, a guy like Mike Davis is still going to be a little bit so-so for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I don't want to spoil the rest of the show. I feel like a lot of the conversation that this could lead into would take us into our waiver wire conversations, but that's going to come up later. So we can talk about that then. We might as well just jump into our top 5s. I do want to say, I don't know if you kept track of, last week's to kind of monitor how you did in terms of picking guys into the top 5. I know you did that week 1 into week 2, and I didn't. So I made sure to do that this week. I had 2 of the top 5 quarterbacks, 2 of the top 5 running backs, 0 of the top 5 receivers, and 3 of the tight ends. So not bad in the tight end area, which is actually surprising to me because of how up and down that position could be. I was pretty happy that I was able to get 3 out of the 5. The receivers, though, way off. Oddly enough, one of the guys, I did have the team, but I didn't have the player. So I got 7 total out of 20.
Nice. It's funny you bring it up because I tried tweeting it out and then I thought I hit save draft because I was in the middle of doing something else and didn't save. I think I might have just hit delete tweet, but I did look at it earlier today. I did have Dak Prescott as quarterback 1 last week and he did finish his out, so I get to kind of toot my own horn with that.
I would count that as 2. You had the exact spot. I was just saying I had these guys in the top 5, not the exact spot, but yeah.
Yeah, so I had 3 quarterbacks. I believe I had 2 running backs, 2 receivers, and then 1 tight end. So not the best week, but it's still early in the fantasy season. We're still trying to figure things out. So.
Right. Okay. Well, like I said, we can jump into our top 5 plays by position for week 3 as soon as I tell you guys about Manscaped. So, support for Around the 412 is brought to you by Manscaped, who is the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. They obsess over their technology developments to provide you the best tools for your grooming experience. I got one. Tyler's got one. Stubbs has one. Sarge has one. Our friend Nick has one. All my friends are getting in on the action. They all love them. They've had great experiences with them. I've had great experiences with them. I recently just got the cologne and the body wash. Those smell fantastic too. The ball deodorant and the ball toner are life-changing. I love every product that I've gotten from these guys. So Manscaped has redesigned the electric trimmer. They spent 18 months doing so, a year and a half to perfect the Lawnmower 3.0, their newest in technology. The 3rd generation trimmer features a cutting-edge ceramic blade to reduce grooming accidents thanks to advanced skin-safe technology pioneered by Manscaped. This thing is premium. The battery lasts up to 90 minutes off its charger, so you can get a longer shave. Don't know why you would need 90 minutes to do so, but hey, you can take that much time with it. It's waterproof. It's got an LED light to illuminate the grooming area. Upgraded to 7,000 RPM motor with quiet stroke technology. The charging stand is USB. That's pretty much all I got to say on it. All I know is if you go to manscaped.com right now, when you're listening back to this, watching this, open up a new tab, go to manscaped.com, put everything that they got in a cart, go to checkout, enter the code 412 at checkout. That would get you 20% off plus free shipping. Again, that's code 412 at checkout, manscaped.com. The stuff is awesome. They just recently added a new nose and ear trimmer as well. So yeah, they're constantly coming out with new stuff. It's top of the line. I love it, and I highly recommend it to everybody. So with that being said, I do want to thank some people, by the way, because I saw in our YouTube chat, which I said I'm keeping up on my phone, because shout out to our friend Jared Oliva of the Pirates, making his debut in left field tonight. He did get an at bat last night, but he's actually starting tonight. I know that we don't talk about baseball on here. This is a fantasy football show, but I can't even explain to you how proud I am. I mean, I've been waiting for 2 years for this moment, so I got to have it on my TV, of course. So shout out to Jared. But I also want to say thanks to Ricky. He came in here and congratulated us. We hit 1,000 subscribers on the YouTube page, which is awesome. It's just one step closer to where we want to get with that. We also hit 6,000 followers on Twitter today. So yeah, pretty big day for Around the 412. We can't thank you guys enough for all the support, whether it be just watching the videos, listening back to the podcast, just following us on Twitter, interact with us, whatever way that you interact with Around the 412. We can't thank you enough. Tyler came in here to mention that Alvin Robinson was not a top 5 wide receiver, and that is true. That is one of the misses that I had, the many misses I had last week. So let's start. Let's go from tight ends. Let's start with tight ends because I'm excited about my tight end number 5 here. This is a guy that I haven't had in my top 5 list yet. He's making his debut here, and rightfully so. Mike Gesicki of the Miami Dolphins going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars here, which is a mouthwatering matchup. He's produced as if he should be in my top 5, but I haven't put him there yet. Led all tight ends in targets last week. I think he graded out as the highest tight end. This guy, where did he go to school again? I can't remember where he went to.
We are.
Oh, okay.
Penn State.
Yeah. He's turned into an absolute stud for that team. Devonte Parker still being a little bit hampered by that hamstring injury. Mike Gesicki paid huge dividends last week. I feel like he should be rostered in every league by now. If he's not, go pick him up. I'm a big Mike Gesicki fan this week going against Jacksonville. I will say, don't love Thursday Night Football matchups, but when it comes to tight end position, this was too good of a matchup to pass up. So.
Well, yeah, and to counter the Thursday night point, that just gives defenses a little bit less time to prepare for a guy like Gesicki. So, I mean, that's just a counter way of thinking. So it could really go either way, depending on how you feel. I thought about putting Gesicki in the top 5, but this week just couldn't. I didn't trust a tight end like him, replicating such a big performance like that. So my tight end 5 is going to be Noah Fant versus Tampa Bay. Averaging about 18 points per game, looked fantastic against one of the better defenses in the NFL in Pittsburgh last week. Drew Lock is out with an injury, so it looks like it's a Jeff Driscoll show moving forward. And he targeted Noah Fant a lot. Those two obviously have that nice connection. Jerry Jeudy went out with an injury. I think KJ Hamler is okay. I don't remember if he was.
Who knows, man? Denver's just beat up.
Cortland Sutton is now pretty much done for the year with the it was a knee injury? Yeah, it was.
He tore his ACL. He's done.
Yeah. So he's done. Noah Fant's going to be the guy for the Broncos offense to target. And I have to like a matchup with Tampa Bay. Like I said earlier, 18 points per contest. I'm not sure if he exactly hits that point total this upcoming week, but you have to think that the Broncos are going to be throwing the ball a lot.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I flirted with him going into my top 5. I didn't end up putting him in my top 5. I will say though, I'm expecting somebody back, and I think we all know who that tight end would be. If for some reason he were not to be able to go, I would probably have Fant in here. I'll just talk about him now because I actually have him at tight end 4 when I would typically have him higher. George Kittle going against the Giants, which I really like this matchup, but I'm concerned about the state of the 49ers right now with all those injuries, and I'm concerned about that knee, and he's playing in New York where people have complained about this field already. And, I hope that that's not the case. I hope that this, it's not a cause for concern going forward, that every time that people play on this field, we're going to see these devastating injuries. And I'm not predicting that by any means. I will just say I'm a little weary of George Kittle. And that's still having him as my number 4. I just don't want to put him in there as a top 3 play based off what we've seen from my top 3 tight ends in the current state of the 49ers. Jimmy Garoppolo got hurt in that game. Who knows what's going to be going on with him? Granted, if Mullins is the quarterback, I think we'll see a heavy dose of George Kittle anyway. I still think he has a solid baseline, but I don't think he's a top 3 play this week simply for that reason. I'm just not all that confident in what I'm seeing from the 49ers.
Yeah, I'm not exactly on his hype train either. Just between his injury status and, with Jimmy Garoppolo and pretty much everybody else out in the 49ers offense, I don't even have Kittle in my top 5. We'll see how that goes. Like you said, a bunch of 49ers players sent legitimate concerns to the NFL about the field at the Meadowlands after playing the Jets, and so many players going down with injuries. So we'll see how that develops. But George Kittle, I understand whenever he's healthy, obviously being a top 5 every single week. And, I feel like George Kittle is the kind of guy where if he says he's good to go and he wants to play, then he'll probably play. But just moving on, my number 4 tight end is going to be Darren Waller versus the New England Patriots. Phenomenal game last night in Monday Night Football. Had 12 or 13 receptions, got in the end zone, had just this monster week. The connection with Derek Carr is legitimate. It is real. I think that connection's probably there better than any other Raiders receiver could say. Josh Jacobs can't produce 3 touchdowns like he did every week, so somebody else needs to get in the end zone. And I think more weeks than not, that's going to be Darren Waller. I am a little bit concerned playing a New England defense where Bill Belichick loves to take away the best thing that you do and force you to beat him other ways. So I think the Patriots will focus a little bit more on Darren Waller. Which obviously might limit his production. But just talk about top 5 tight ends and a position where you never really know what you're going to get week in and week out. Darren Waller is probably one of the better tight ends in the league when it comes to producing.
Yeah, I get that it's a tough matchup. I actually have Waller a little bit higher. I'm a huge believer in him, and I think that at this point he's shown that he's kind of matchup proof, at least for playing his way into the top 3 or 4 tight ends on a weekly basis. I do want to mention before we move on, just because it's kind of related with San Fran, listener of the show, Ricky Duncan, mentioned he's trying to get Jerick McKinnon, who is probably going to be like the top waiver priority guy. I did not put him on here in terms of like the waiver wire portion of the show, just because he's owned in a pretty solid portion, at least of Yahoo league. So he didn't qualify.
Same with ESPN.
He didn't qualify for the baseline I was looking for. But if Jerick McKinnon's available, I think he has to be added immediately. You have injuries to Raheem Mostert and to Tevin Coleman. I mean, it's going to be the Jerick McKinnon show in that backfield. Of course, Jimmy Garoppolo banged up, whether he's going to, I think he's going to play, but, who knows how effective he's going to be. The injury to George Kittle, the state of the wide receivers. It's not a good thing going on in San Fran right now, but Jerick McKinnon healthy, it's going to be his show for a while. So yeah, he should be picked up if he is available. I love that addition. Moving on to my tight end number 3, though, I'm going with Mark Andrews here against Kansas City. He let me down a little bit this past week, and I'll get on to that actually a little bit later as well. But, I'm expecting to bounce back here going against Kansas City. This is going to be the game of the week on Monday Night Football. And it's going to be a fun matchup between the quarterback and tight end connections as well. And I think both of those duos are going to have solid games. I look for Mark Andrews to rebound in a big way. And I don't know it's necessarily on him that he didn't have a great game. I think just game script wasn't favorable. They got it pretty big on Houston early and just kind of got away from the pass. Same thing with Lamar Jackson. They were just running the ball down their throat and got it done that way. So Mark Andrews, to me, bounces back in a big way this week, and he's my tight end 3.
Yeah, Andrews is also going to be my tight end 3. And like you said, it's just a mouth-watering matchup with the Kansas City Chiefs. You definitely expect the scoreboard to not be working at the end of the day, just between all the points being scored there. I feel like we talk about Andrews every week being the guy, for the Baltimore Ravens, at least whenever Lamar Jackson drops back to pass. And kind of like you already alluded to, game script definitely got away from the Ravens. They got up on the Texans early, finished with 230 rushing yards against Houston, so they definitely just pounded the ball. Not necessarily working in favor of Mark Andrews, but obviously you got Patrick Mahomes and company rolling into town, so I do think they're passing the ball a little bit more. So yeah, Mark Andrews is my tight end 3 as well.
Good stuff. You already talked about my tight end 2. It's going to be Darren Waller going against New England. New England, at least in the 2 games this year, and obviously going back even last year, they don't give up a lot in terms of points to the tight end position. But this just speaks to how I feel about Darren Waller's connection with Derek Carr. I think it's really getting up there amongst the best quarterback tight end duos in football. And I'm not a huge Derek Carr guy. When it comes to targeting Darren Waller, he's been pretty damn good at it. So Derek Carr's fantasy value continues to trend in the upward direction. And we talked about, you have Kittle and Kelsey at the beginning of the year, and it's everybody else. You kind of have Mark Andrews and Darren Waller a tier lower, and then you have everybody else. And we thought, Mark Andrews kind of jumping into that upper echelon where he might join Kittle and Kelsey. If Darren Waller keeps going on this trajectory, we're going to be talking about that Mount Rushmore of tight ends where it's a top 4, not just the top 3. I'm a huge Darren Waller guy. I think that train continues going into New England this week.
No, most definitely. I'm a little surprised I have this guy this high, and I'm probably just riding off of a big week 2 performance. And I feel like you already know who this guy is just because I love this guy when it comes to tight ends. Hayden Hurst is my tight end 2.
Ooh, yeah, okay.
Plays against the Chicago Bears defense that is 21st against tight ends in terms of just allowing points per game. Got 18 points last week with George Kittle questionable. A guy like Hayden Harris is definitely going to be around that tight end 2 conversation after the tight end 1, who we're obviously going to talk about here in a little bit, Travis Kelsey. But Hayden Hurst finally lived up to the billing, in a strong game against the Dallas Cowboys. Finally got in the end zone, was wide open on his touchdown catch, and he looked productive. And I think that's what a lot of people expect out of him. And while it might not be week to week, this matchup with Chicago is a little bit mouth savory, as one would say.
Yeah, we talked about him quite a bit on this show, and we've talked about the Atlanta offense too, whether they're winning games or they're blowing games like they did against the Dallas Cowboys. They're going to put up points, and Matt Ryan is going to put up yards. Even if they get down in the game, they're going to get the garbage points. I think in this game against Chicago, though, I don't expect Chicago to be blowing them out by any means, but I still think Atlanta's going to be pass heavy every single week. And Hayden Hurst is a guy that I kind of got burned by benching last week, and I don't think I'll make that mistake again. He for me was probably a borderline guy. I probably would have him like tight end 7. I do like the matchup with Chicago, and I like Atlanta to be able to put some points on the board again this week. When you have guys like Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley, who I'll talk about later, taking a lot of that attention away, I mean, the opportunity is ample for Hayden Hurst to fill that Austin Hooper role in that offense, which we've been pounding the table that he could do. So, yeah, really like Hayden Hurst. For tight end 1, I mean, what is there to say? It's Travis Kelsey in this game against Baltimore on Monday night for both of us. Obviously going against Baltimore, not the greatest matchup. They limit tight ends pretty well, but it's Travis Kelsey and it's Pat Mahomes. It's the best tight end quarterback connection that we have in the game. I still think that they're going to get theirs, regardless of who wins this game, what the outcome is. I still think by the end of it, we're looking at a Travis Kelsey box score where he's leading the team in targets, probably in yardage, and he's probably going to catch a touchdown. So, I mean, it's on par with every single week. Regardless of who the opponent is, Travis Kelsey's going to get his numbers, and that's no different this week. So,
Yeah, I was a little worried of putting Kelsey as my tight end one this week, and granted with how good Baltimore's defense has been, and with their secondary, as well, limiting guys like Tyreek Hill, Sammy Watkins, Mecole Hardman. But at the end of the day, you just have to trust that Mahomes Kelsey connection. Kelsey had 14 targets last week in the overtime win versus the Chargers. Not exactly the best matchup, but Mahomes is first and foremost going to try to establish that connection versus Kelsey. So at the bare minimum, the targets are going to be there, and I feel like with as talented as Travis Kelsey is, he's going to take advantage of those.
Right. Okay. So moving along, let's just go to receivers. I told you before we started recording, I was very excited to get receivers because I know that this is going to be a surprise for everybody. My wide receiver five, Deonte Johnson of the Pittsburgh Steelers, going against the Houston Texans on Sunday, a 1:00 game. Deonte Johnson is third in the NFL in targets this year, obviously first on the Steelers. He's only behind DeAndre Hopkins and Darren Waller in targets. I think that continues the connection that him and Big Ben are starting to put together. A guy that didn't get to play with his quarterback last year, other than that game in New England, which wasn't pretty for everybody. Deonte Johnson's progress since that game has been unbelievable. What he's become as a receiver. And Ben, I think, has fallen in love with him. That takes nothing away from the connection that Ben and Juju have. I just think that Deonte is the more nuanced route runner. I honestly feel like he's going to end up being wide receiver one if he's not already by the time the season comes around. Again, that's not a slight at Juju. That's just high praise for Deonte Johnson. And I love this matchup with Houston. I mean, we've seen it already with Houston's past opponents. They're not limiting receivers at all. So I think it's a very burnable secondary. I think Deonte Johnson will be open all game, and I think he has a big, big fantasy day.
Listen, you do not have to convince me that Deonte top 5 receiver. I have been pounding the hype train since day one. I've come on this show and said that Deonte is going to finish as wide receiver one over Juju. I got a lot of weird looks for that. And granted, Juju is having himself a pretty solid year, but Deonte Johnson's about to blow the lid off the league, man. So I'm very glad you think that way. I don't have DJ in my top 5 this week. I'm sure I will have him here in the future. My number 5 receiver going to week 3 is going to be Alvin Robinson versus the Atlanta Falcons. Bold move, Cotton. We'll see if it pays off. I mean, facing one of the league's worst pass defenses early on. He's been a little bit disappointing, but Robinson still gets those targets week in and week out. Mitch Trubisky doesn't look terrible through the first couple weeks, which feels really weird to say. But I saw a stat that said only about 47% of Robinson's targets have been deemed catchable by Pro Football Focus, so take that with a grain of salt. But I just think the Bears are going to be, really tempted to pass the ball against a very weak Falcons secondary. And Allen Robinson's the guy in Chicago, so you just got to trust that he'll use his big body and all the other motor skills he has to come down with a couple catches, but. All you can really ask for is opportunity, and Alvin Robinson's going to have a lot of that come Sunday.
Going back to the Allen Robinson well. I tried it last week. It didn't pay off for me. So.
Yeah, I think it was just alternate week to week.
Yeah, going against Atlanta, though, I mean, we saw that Dallas-Atlanta game. I think everybody saw it. They at least saw the way it ended. But, yeah, Dallas's wide receivers, they had a big day in that second half. And I think that could continue on this week. I don't think Allen Robinson that's far-fetched at all. I think that, if I were continuing my list, I say this every week, but I think he's probably just outside the top 5. I mean, I had him in the top 5 last week, so obviously I'm high on Allen Robinson himself. It's really going to come down to, can Mitch Trubisky get him the ball? And I think against an Atlanta secondary, there's a higher chance of that happening than against a lot of opponents. So, yeah, I don't mind that pick at all. My number 4, we'll see, what we have to monitor his status at practice throughout the week. But again, we talked about the target share, the volume that he gets. If Davante Adams is able to go against New Orleans, he's going to be my wide receiver 4. I feel like he's throwing the ball on every single passing play. I don't think that anybody else even gets looked at by Aaron Rodgers. And going against New Orleans, I mean, you just mentioned what the top pass catcher for the Raiders did in Darren Waller. Granted, he plays a different position, but I'm just looking at the fact that that's the top option in the passing game, much like Davante Adams is for the Green Bay Packers. And I think that he could have a really nice day as well. Lattimore for New Orleans, if that's the guy that's covering him, he really hasn't looked like that number 1 true shutdown corner. In my opinion, for a lot of his career, I think that he's been pretty up and down. It's well documented the battles he's had with Mike Evans, but I think that the potential is obviously still there. I think that he is, a number 1 corner. He just, to me, at times hasn't looked the part. And I think against one of the best route runners, if not the best route runner in the league, Devonte Adams, if he's good to go in this game, is still going to have his way. So he comes into my wide receiver 4, assuming that he suits up on Sunday.
Yeah, and apparently he was held out for precautionary reasons last Sunday. So apparently that's why he didn't go and finish out the game. I was a little bit worried on Devonte playing this week, so I don't have him in my top 5. But if he is healthy, for me, he's a matchup-proof guy. I don't care who's across him. He's going to put up the numbers that he should. But my number 4 receiver going to week 3, making his debut. Terry F1 McLaurin.
Oh, that's not one of them.
Washington football team receiver going against the Cleveland Browns. Finished as a top 5 receiver last week, going against a Cleveland Browns defense that ranks 27th in points per game versus receivers. Man, the Washington football team might not win that game, though they might, but they might not come out victorious on the scoreboard. But Terry F1 McLaurin is going to tear that secondary up, man. I can't say enough good things about him. It took them a little while to get going versus Arizona last week. He scored in the later parts. No, did that. He scored in the later parts. Scored in the later parts of the game against the Cardinals. So, granted, he did get a couple points boosted from that. But McLaurin is, by far the number 1 passing or running target, for the Washington football team. So I definitely have him in my top 5 this week.
He's number 1 through 3 in terms of
yeah. He's 2 and 3.
I love Scary Terry. He's got. He might be like my favorite non-Steeler for obvious reasons of where he went to school, but also I was so high on him going into the draft process, and when I saw him drop to 83rd or something overall, he went. I was like, "Are you kidding me?"
Yeah.
I knew that he was going to be a much better pro than he was in college, and I'm happy to see that is happening. Beefy came in here. He mentioned he has Deonte Johnson and Alvin Robinson. So if we're both wrong, he wants to throw hands. So he might be having to make a flight out to Arizona if that's the case. So, but I have, like I said, I have 2 guys making their debuts on here for me. When I was going through receivers, kind of like with the running backs, realizing how different it is because of no Michael Thomas and no Julio Jones producing the way that we expect him, which I do have. No, I don't want to ruin the surprise yet. Number 3 for me, DK Metcalf against the Dallas Cowboys, wide receiver 3. Dude absolutely bullied Stephon Gilmore, who is considered the number 1 corner in football by a lot of people, not named Zach Smith. So DK Metcalf, huge week. Russell Wilson having an MVP year to this point. I know it's just 2 games, but get on the hype train while you can. The odds for him to win MVP have gone from plus 600 to plus 250. He's now the odds-on favorite to win the MVP award. So get in on it while you still can before it continues to get worse in terms of the odds for him to win. But DK Metcalf, he's really coming into his own. This is a guy that I know he drew a lot of criticism pre-draft for his 3-cone drill and not being able to do certain things. But listen, just let him run. Let him go do his thing. He knows how to play football. He's a top-tier receiver. He's only getting better, it seems like, every time that he steps out on the football field. That continues against the Dallas secondary that, again, I know that they won the game, but the likes of Calvin Ridley ate them up in that game. So I still like DK Metcalf along with his MVP quarterback, Russell Wilson, to put up some points in this game.
Dude, strong belief in DK. Actually, I have his teammate just a little bit later in this list, so I definitely see the intrigue and the one to put one of those guys in the top 5. So I'm definitely with you there. DK Metcalf's a grown-ass man. I don't think there's any doubting that. Did he not have a good 3-cone drill? Sure. Does he turn like the Titanic? Sure. Dude, at the end of the day, man, he's going to bully any cornerback that lines up opposite him. It doesn't matter if it's the defensive player of the year or not. DK is just a phenomenal physical specimen. So, yeah, I'm very glad he's starting to pick up the pace. My wide receiver 3, I think you might talk about him. I think we might have these guys swapped. I have Calvin Ridley versus the Chicago Bears as my wide receiver 3. Sorry if I ruined anything for you. Double-digit targets last week, 2 touchdowns in each game. Sorry, not just last week. Double-digit targets in week 1 and week 2, and 2 touchdowns in week 1 and week 2. He already eats with a guy named Julio Jones and lined up, and with Julio being questionable, we're not sure if he's going to play. Regardless if he does, but even if Julio doesn't play, Calvin Ridley's in for a huge day versus the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm picking my wide receiver 2 is a wide receiver for the Atlanta Falcons that went to Alabama. No, Calvin Ridley's a guy that I said was going to take the jump into wide receiver 2 this year. He might take the jump into wide receiver 1 this year. I mean, that's what he's doing so far to start this season. And again, it doesn't translate to wins for the football team, but he is putting up some monster numbers opposite of Julio Jones. And from a fantasy standpoint, at least, we'll see if it continues all year. He has taken over the wide receiver reins from Julio Jones. So I have Calvin Ridley as my wide receiver 2 this week going against the Chicago Bears. And, the Bears, we'll see if he gets Jalen Johnson, the rookie for Chicago, or who lines up with Calvin Ridley. Either way, I like Calvin Ridley's chances this week, obviously. I think that this is going to be a very intriguing matchup. And I'm big on Calvin Ridley. I don't see a way that right now I can keep him outside of my top 5. And when I was going through doing this, I was like, man, I really am going to have him and DK Metcalf as 2 and 3.
Yeah, and not to keep harping on it, but no, I'm right there with you, Calvin Ridley. I had to have him in my top 5, especially after the performance he's had through the first 2 weeks. My wide receiver 2, since you already talked about yours, I also have a Seattle receiver in my top 5. Not named DK Metcalf. Tyler Lockett is my wide receiver 2. Definitely, throwing the dice here with him finishing as the number 2 receiver. 8 targets 2 weeks in a row. He finally found the end zone last week in Sunday Night Football. Faced the Dallas secondary this week that allowed probably around 300 passing yards. Sorry, not probably. Did allow a little over 300 passing yards last week to the Atlanta Falcons. They're not super strong on the defensive secondary, so I definitely think Russell Wilson will continue to put up those MVP numbers through week 3, and Tyler Lockett, his main guy, is going to be a big part of that.
Yeah, I think that the case could be made for either one. I honestly, though, I think that one of them is going to finish in the top 5.
Same.
So
Yeah, it's a coin flip for me, either way.
Yeah, I think that DK is probably the more boom or bust guy. I think Tyler Lockett's the more safe pick. Yeah, I mean, it just depends how that secondary is going to match up. But I think at least one of them, if not both, are in store for a big day. I'm just looking at the big play potential of DK, thinking, he makes one play like he did against Stephon Gilmore. That's pretty close to top 5 production, just that one play alone. So, yeah, and then my top 5 will round out with DeAndre Hopkins, the Arizona Cardinals going against the Detroit Lions. Too good of a matchup. Him and Kyler Murray are really on the same page. Obviously, the huge first week that he had, but didn't catch a touchdown. Week 2, he catches a touchdown. So, I mean, that rapport is just getting better and better. I'm excited to watch that connection continue to go against Detroit's secondary. Even if it is Jeff Okudah starting his second game, that's lining up with him a lot. I think DeAndre Hopkins is in store for a big day.
Yeah, Hopkins by wide receiver 1. The Lions gave up nearly 70 points through the first 2 weeks. So, Cliff Kingsbury is just licking his chops, trying to find ways to score against the Lions defense. And obviously, DeAndre Hopkins has established himself as the man in Arizona through the first 2 weeks of the season. So I really like DeAndre Hopkins as a top 5, top 3, and top 1 receiver this week.
Yeah. Now this, I mean, every position, honestly, like I've been saying every time that we go through, the running back landscape, though, just completely changed with the injuries at the top to Christian McCaffrey and Saquon Barkley. So, I mean, there's 2 guys in here that I wouldn't have expected to make my top 5, at least this early in the season. They kind of would have to play their way in, but just by default, what these lists have turned out to look like it wasn't even much of a decision for me. There's only one guy that I really like that I left out. But let's just jump into it. My number 5 making his first appearance for me, and I know you have him higher based off the conversation we had already. Miles Sanders going against the Bengals. We saw what Cleveland did to them on the ground on Thursday Night Football. If I wasn't, still a little unsure of what Philadelphia's offense's potential was, I'd probably have them even a little bit higher. I need to see more from them. I know that they got Lane Johnson back last week. I'm not sure what that offensive line is like. Carson Wentz isn't playing his best football right now. Those things translate to, teams stacking boxes and not being able to run the football. So, until they prove that they can do it, I don't see them as a dynamic offense, but at the same time, too good of a matchup for me to pass up, not having them at least at number 5. And I know you have him higher, but I do like Miles Sanders as a player. If he's going to have a big game this year, it's going to come right here, and we'll find out a lot about Philadelphia's offense this week.
Yeah, and so many people were high or low on Sanders depending on who you talk to. I feel like you either loved Sanders due to his opportunity, or you hate Sanders in the draft process just due to him being a Philadelphia running back. But he didn't look terrible last week. He had a 20-point debut after missing week 1. Philadelphia offense does look like dog shit. There's no getting around that. But like you said, if this is, if there's a week, it's going to happen for Miles Sanders. It's week 3 versus a 30th ranked defense and a Cincinnati Bengals. So, we'll see. I do have him a little bit higher, so I'll just kind of touch on him later. But my RB5, I'm not sure if you have him in the top 5 or not. Aaron Jones versus the New Orleans Saints. So he cracks my top 5. Monster 45-point week last week. Had 236 scrimmage yards, one of the top fantasy running backs heading into this week. Even if you slash that point production in half, he still finished as a top 5 running back last week. You have to finish. There's going to be a lot of points scored between the Packers and the Saints, this upcoming week. And I just feel like outside of Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones is the guy, and he's proven that so far through the first 2 weeks of the season.
Yeah, I mentioned I had one guy that I really liked that I had left out. That was him. So I definitely considered him in my top 5. It just came down to Miles Sanders playing against Cincinnati and liking that matchup a little bit more. My running back number 4 is going to be Ezekiel Elliott against the Seattle Seahawks. Again, not a mouthwater matchup by any means, but it's Ezekiel Elliott. We saw what Dallas' offense is capable of. I mean, Dak Prescott ran for 3 touchdowns in that game. Those touchdowns could have very easily have been Ezekiel Elliott. And I think that more often than not, it will be. I think that game's an outlier. And I think when we, look back, a lot of those carries will go to Ezekiel Elliott, starting with this week against Seattle. I think he's going to run the ball. I think he's going to catch the ball in the backfield. I think he's in store for a top 5 day. He comes in at my wide receiver as my running back 4, even in, a middle of the pack matchup against the Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah, just depending on your running back 3 and your running back 4, we might have the guys switched. Excuse me. So I do have Z just a little bit higher. So my running back 4 is going to be Jonathan Taylor versus the New York Jets. Taylor now with, the disappearance of Marlon Mack now has the keys to the car. Naeem Hines took away most of the passing opportunities last week, but Taylor, 26 carries, versus Minnesota, 100-yard gain, even scored a touchdown. He's going against a Jets defense that frankly just looks lost right now. They don't look together as they should. I think losing Jamal Adams did really hurt them, just, both in the run and in the pass. Taylor still got a lot of tread on him, still running back, still trying to find his way behind what's a very solid, Colts offensive line. Phillip Rivers doesn't look exactly like the quarterback he was, so I'm not worried about, any aerial attack taking points away from Jonathan Taylor. But, through the first 2 weeks of the season, Taylor does look like the guy for the Colts, and I kind of have to ride that wave. So he comes in as my running back 4.
I have him higher. I have him higher than 3.
All right.
So my RB3, and I'm a little weary of doing this, but based off what I saw in week 2, I'm hoping that trend continues. I'm doing Austin Eckler against the Carolina Panthers, who are absolutely terrible against running backs. We mentioned, last week how Josh Jacobs had 3 touchdowns against them in week 1. And I don't think that Austin Eckler's going to get 3 touchdowns, but his usage in the passing game went up in week 2. And the reason I'm weary of doing this is if they go back to Tyrod Taylor. If Justin Herbert were to stay under center, I would absolutely feel confident in having Eckler in my top 5 because I feel like that offense is exactly – that's what needs to happen. Justin Herbert needs to be handed the keys. That offense is going nowhere with Tyrod Taylor. The Chargers have a decent enough team, I feel like, to compete. Depending on what you're getting at the quarterback position, Tyrod Taylor offers that offense nothing. He's not enhancing anybody's play. He needs to be given the keys to that team, Justin Herbert, that is. And Austin Eckler will be a top 5 play should that happen. If Tyrod Taylor is under center, I don't love putting Austin Eckler in here. And we know what Anthony Lynn said. He said that Tyrod Taylor is his starter if healthy. That should be a fireable offense, in my opinion. It should be Justin Herbert's team. Austin Eckler should be getting 20 to 25 touches a game. We know what he can do when he gets the ball in his hands. I'm going to put him as my RB3, but I don't love it.
Yeah, and that's probably the reason why I don't have Eckler in my top 5 is because, Anthony Lynn didn't come out and say, if Tyrod Taylor was healthy, he was going to be the starter. Just in my opinion, that's probably one of the worst things, you could say, especially after watching Herbert have the debut that he had. I feel like it's a little bit too late to not want to stunt that growth. But just focusing back to a fantasy perspective, I do like Eckler there, and I do like Josh Kelly there as well, and I'll be able to talk about him a little bit later. But my RB3, you already talked about him, Ezekiel Elliott versus the Seattle Seahawks. Averaging 25 points per game, going against a Seattle front seven that just lost Bruce Irvin, So, who knows to say, if they're going to be, the same solidified bunch as they have been in the past. And you already took the words out of my mouth. 3 touchdowns by Dak Prescott on the ground. Any one of them could have been Zeke. And I feel like 9 times out of 10, they are going to go to Zeke, it's just one of those guys that you can just plug in your top 5 every week and feel pretty comfortable with it. So he lands as my RB3.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue with that. Obviously, we're not too different in where we have him. You talked about my RB2 already, and making his debut in my top 5, Jonathan Taylor against the New York Jets. I mean, what a terrible football team the New York Jets are. They stink, and there's no other way around it. And I think that even the notes on Jonathan Taylor might say the Jets stink at the end of it. So I love this matchup for him. Obviously, with the injury to Marlon Mack, Naeem Hines only got 1 touch last week, which is not expected by us. I mean, we gave some people some bad advice based off that week. Because we weren't expecting that. We thought he'd pretty much primarily handle the pass catching work out of the backfield for them. But if that's not going to be the case, I mean, Jonathan Taylor could be making regular appearances in the top 5. This is a mouthwatering matchup versus the Jets. That offensive line is one of the best in football. Phillip Rivers, what he's going to do for that passing game doesn't necessarily scare me. I think that they'll go mainly on the ground. Obviously, Paris Campbell's banged up. T.Y. Hilton's getting up there in age. That connection hasn't looked great. Mo Alley Cox did fill in pretty well for Jack Doyle. We'll see what happens with Jack Doyle this week, though. I love Jonathan Taylor in this matchup. I know, I was skeptical on Jonathan Taylor in terms of his full body of work for his NFL careers because there's so much tread on those tires already. But early in his career, that does not come into play. He's going to be a very good back in this league for at least a few years. And yeah, this guy's going to be a stud. This matchup with the Jets, too good to pass up. He comes in at my RB2.
Yeah, so I already talked about your RB2, and you already talked about my RB2. So mine is Miles Sanders versus the Bengals. And not going to be a dead offensive line or a dead, defensive line in either the Bengals or Eagles. So Sanders comes in as my RB2, and I'm assuming we have the same RB1, which is Alvin Kamara versus the Green Bay Packers. So monster Monday night performance. You should see big numbers at the end, especially if a guy like Michael Thomas is out.
Yeah, I mean, you said a monster game. I mean, he gets in the end zone twice again. And it's crazy because it's his usage is like we see Latavius Murray still getting like 13 to 15 carries a game. Can Alvin Kamara keep up that touchdown production? Probably not. But we're just expecting that the targets are going to continue to at least keep him at the safe baseline, if not go up in the absence of Michael Thomas. I mean, Emmanuel Sanders, complete non-factor. A guy like Traquan Smith and Jared Cook were the only ones that really benefited in that offense. That offense looked terrible last night in general, but so it was pretty much the Alvin Kamara show. But yeah, I mean, every single week until Christian McCaffrey's back, Alvin Kamara is a guy that will probably finish when I say finish, I mean coming onto the show when I'm doing my rankings, will be my RB1. So as a fantasy owner, love him. What he brings to the field, love him. I really just, the only thing that I could say is I wish that the Saints would just pretty much let him be an every down back and not even use Latavius Murray, but I get it.
No, I definitely get it, especially if you, you just paid the man and you want to make sure you get your full investment worth. So I definitely understand that line of thinking. And like you pointed out, Latavius Murray is still playing, quite a decent amount of snaps. So for Kamara to produce at the rate he's producing is phenomenal. And while the touchdown production probably won't keep up, a lot of people harped on his touchdown production from last year, not getting in the end zone nearly enough as he did in 2018. So it's nice to see him kind of bounce back as a Kamara owner personally.
Yeah, I said I was looking for 10 touchdowns this year, and I think he's got 4 already. So,
yeah.
Now the QBs, this is going to be interesting as well, just because I have a different guy as my QB1, and I feel like you're going to end up having the same guy and end up ruining it.
I don't know. My QB1's probably your QB1 every week, so we'll see.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So my QB number 5, we'll start there. QB1 of last week, Dak Prescott bounced back in a big way against the Atlanta Falcons. Don't love the matchup by any means against the Seattle Seahawks, but I think they're going to be throwing the ball a lot as they will every week. There's so many weapons on that offense. I think the Dak Prescott that we'll see most weeks is somewhere in between week 1 and week 2, but probably closer to week 2. So I will ride with Dak Prescott being a top 5 play most weeks, and that is even going into this matchup with Seattle.
Yeah, so I have Dak a little bit higher, so I'll talk about him in a bit. And yeah, you're either going to get week 1 or week 2, Dak Prescott. And I think week 2, Dak Prescott is probably the more likely one and probably the more favorable one, just in terms of people drafting him as quarterback 3 after guys like Mahomes and Jackson. But quarterback 5 for me this week is going to be Aaron Rodgers versus the New Orleans Saints. About 50 fantasy points in the league I was in last week. Going up against the Saints defense that just looked terrible, to be frank, got carved up by some guy named Derek Carr with, a bunch of, not nobodies, but a bunch of young, unproven players, There's not a whole lot to say when it comes to Aaron Rodgers and, Devonte Adams with that connection. It's been tried and tested throughout the years, and somehow Devonte Adams still catches 2 or 3 touchdowns a week. I already kind of said this with the running backs and receivers, but I'm circling Green Bay, New Orleans as, the premier fantasy matchup this week, just in terms of fantasy points being scored. So Aaron Rodgers, he's had a pretty good start to 2020, 40 points on the offensive side of the ball back-to-back weeks. I'm not sure that continues, but I do think he'll finish top 5 this week.
Yeah, I do not have Rodgers in my top 5, and I'm assuming that the difference is going to be I have this guy in my top 5 at QB4. Patrick Mahomes going against the Baltimore Ravens. He hasn't had the top 5 finish. He didn't even finish top 5 week 1, huh? So I don't think he is week 1 or 2. Week 1, I feel like you can attribute more to that not being a very close game and Kansas City going run heavy. Week 2, though, pretty close game against the Chargers. They didn't do anything really offensively until the fourth quarter. Kind of had to pull one out of their, what's. Again, that's for the last 5 games. They've trailed by 10 points or more going back to the playoffs last year against Houston, that big comeback. So obviously not a great matchup going against the Baltimore Ravens here. One of the best defenses in football, one of the best secondaries in football. Both those corners, play at an all-pro level. I'm just looking at it as, it's so hard not to put him in the top 5. And I know that, you can touch on why you didn't have him here, because I know that you didn't. But, this matchup with Baltimore is terrible. I mean, there's no other way around it. I just look at him, his talent. I look at the weapons. I'm hopeful that Clyde Edwards-Hilaire's role out of the backfield catching passes continues to expand. And maybe he gets points that way, because I feel like the wide receivers don't have great matchups at all. It's going to be Travis Kelsey and Clyde Edwards-Hilaire that make this game for me. If Pat Mahomes is going to finish in the top 5, it's going to be because those 2 guys had big days.
No, most definitely. If I drafted Patrick Mahomes, I'm going to roll him out this week in week 3. I feel like you kind of have to, not unless you just have superb backup quarterback play lying around. But the matchup just is not really there for me to put him in top 5. And like you referenced, he hasn't finished as a top 5 quarterback week 1 or week 2. Purely going based off of the matchups. I never want to doubt Mahomes and what he's able to do. But the matchup against the Ravens, at least on paper, looks very scary. Granted, that could completely change Monday night whenever those teams come, to meet about. But no, not in my top 5. My quarterback 4 is going to be Russell Wilson versus the Dallas Cowboys. Quarterback 1 through the first 2 games of the year, averaging 30 points per game. Like you said, MVP candidate. Going up against the Dallas defense that, hasn't looked all too phenomenal, especially, giving up, I think, about 300 yards versus Matt Ryan last week. He can get it done both, through the air and on the ground. He's got the weapons around him to do it. So, I think, Russ is feeling dangerous, especially in the early parts of the season. So he lands my quarterback 4.
Yeah, he's actually my quarterback 3. And I like this matchup with Dallas. As you alluded to, the numbers that Matt Ryan was able to put up in a losing effort, still, astronomical, had a good day. And I like Russ to keep doing the same thing he's been doing, putting on that MVP campaign that he's had with the emergence of DK Metcalf and obviously Tyler Lockett as well. I love Russell Wilson, man. I don't think that he's going to be outside my top 3 for most of this year. So matchup with Dallas does not scare me at all when I like him as a top 3 play.
Yeah, you already talked about my quarterback 3, which is going to be Dak Prescott. Quarterback 1 last week against pass defense that allowed Cam Newton to just completely gash them. I think Cam Newton had his 3rd highest passing total ever versus the Seahawks last week. So I'm fairly confident in Dallas's abilities to keep that going and, just keep the pressure on the Seahawks secondary that didn't look all too phenomenal last week. So I'm curious to see who your quarterback 1 and quarterback 2 is.
All right. So my quarterback 2, going back to that Monday Night Football matchup, is going to be Lamar Jackson against the Kansas City Chiefs. as QB2. So I think you know where I'm going with QB1. But as far as QB2, Lamar Jackson, we mentioned kind of the drop off in points that he had from week 1 to week 2. I think you can attribute that to just game script not very favorable. They didn't have to throw the ball much in that game against Houston. They were just able to do it on the ground. But I think that this is a get right spot for him from a fantasy standpoint, and him and Mark Andrews are able to really get things going in this game. And that's why I said I have both quarterback tight end connections in my top 5. Monday Night Football is going to be a lot of fun, and I think Lamar Jackson is going to have a bounce back game and get back into those top 3 quarterback plays.
Yeah, I definitely expect that as well. So, we do have quarterbacks 1 and quarterback 2 flip flop. So that's just kind of keep the chain going on Lamar. Going against 25th ranked defense, for passing wise, finished another 17 points in week 2, but definitely should improve that. Kansas City's defense isn't a slouch defense by any means, but I definitely feel like a guy like Lamar can take advantage of that. And then, so my quarterback 2, your quarterback 1 is going to be the Kyler Murray, going up against the Detroit Lions, 4th ranked quarterback through the last 2 weeks. Is quarterback 4 right now. 32 points last week. Detroit has a 26th ranked pass defense, and it seems like he's just getting better and better. As the days go on. We were really excited for him. We've been pounding the table for his rookie year, and now it looks like he's paying dividends for us.
Yeah, somebody said in the chat just a few minutes ago, can you help me? We can always help you. So whatever you need help with, just type it and we will try to do so. But yeah, my QB1 this week is going to be Kyler Murray against the Detroit Lions. Too good of a matchup to pass up. If they were playing equally bad teams, I think I would probably lean Lamar. But I think that's more of a middle of the pack defense that he's facing, whereas Kyler Murray's facing one of the worst. And Kyler Murray's averaging 80 yards rushing on top of what he's doing through the air. DeAndre Hopkins, it looks like Christian Kirk might have, started to take the next step. Mr. Reliable, Larry Fitzgerald, what he's got in the backfield with Chase Edmonds and Kenyon Drake. I'm a big fan of that offense. I said it last week. I think it continues this week, and Kyler Murray is my QB1.
Yeah, I can't put up very much of an argument against that. So, it's just a matter of preference, flopping 1 and 2.
Right. Okay. So we mentioned that we were going to talk some waiver wire. So I look for a baseline. I think I mentioned this on the last show, around 50%. Hopefully you can go under 50%. Last week, I know I had one guy that was over. This week, I was able to get one guy from each position under 50. Starting with the quarterback position, just under 50, and that probably won't last. I don't know where he's at in other sites. Owning just 46% of Yahoo leagues, Ryan Tannehill, and 6 touchdowns to no interceptions. Right now, he's in the top 15 overall players in fantasy football, and that's without having A.J. Brown in week 2. I mean, what him and Jonnu Smith have done, I'm very hopeful that connection continues to grow. We'll see if he can help Corey Davis provide some fantasy value, but it's really once A.J. Brown comes back, and we'll see if it's in week 3, Ryan Tannehill is just going to continue to provide solid fantasy value and back end QB1 production. I think that this is a solid streaming play. I think that he's a solid guy to have on your roster should you have not drafted a quarterback early. I'm a big fan of Ryan Tannehill. I wasn't expecting, much from him in terms of fantasy value being in a run heavy offense, but they run a lot of play action and he's putting up decent numbers again to warrant at least back end QB1 consideration.
Yeah, so Tannehill is also my waiver quarterback out of the league. 40% of ESPN leagues is his current roster status. I'm sure that's going to shoot up whenever this episode comes out. 26 points last week, 26 fantasy points, and faces a Minnesota defense ranks 21st against the pass. Exactly like you said, not a terrible streaming option. You can find a lot worse than him. Hopefully he does get A.J. Brown back, so that'll boost him up a little bit. But no, if it's scouting the waiver wire, I definitely feel safe getting a guy like Ryan Tannehill and plugging him if you need it.
Yeah, Ricky mentioned he has Josh Allen, which, I mean, we talked about him before. He's kind of right. He's always on that cusp for me. Like, should I put him in the top 5?
Yeah.
And right now, I just mentioned Russell Wilson as MVP. I know it's just 2 weeks. Josh Allen looks like he should get some type of consideration.
He looks good. This is coming from a guy who does not think very highly of him. He looks good, both throwing and running the ball. So we'll see if that can continue throughout the season.
Like if there was like a most improved player, I think he'd be up for consideration for that.
Yeah, definitely. At least for the first 2 weeks. Yeah.
Okay, so moving along to the running backs. I don't love this by any means, but going through it, I think that Myles Gaskin would probably be the guy that I would go with if he were available. But Dion Lewis, I went with just because he's owned in just 7% of the leagues. Obviously, the injury to Saquon. I know that Devonte Freeman's there now, but as I mentioned, I think any production that you get from that backfield is going to be because of them catching passes, and I think that that's what Dion Lewis's role in that offense is going to be. I don't love it by any means. If you're talking about grabbing a running back off the waiver wire right now, I know that Ricky said Jerick McKinnon was available. That's great if he's there. Like I said, I would probably go with Gaskin above Dion Lewis as well. He's kind of taken over the reins in that Miami backfield, at least for the time being. But yeah, Dion Lewis would probably be the guy I went with just because of how low percentage of owned he is in leagues. And, I think he probably warrants at least some flex consideration, low end flex, if you play 2 flexes for sure. We'll see how things shake out. I'm not even like Devonte Freeman. Do you think he even gets a helmet right away? I mean, think about it. Like he's not even.
We'll see. I do think the Giants wouldn't sign somebody who can't play right away. So you would have to assume that Devonte Freeman does get on the field as soon as possible. But like I pointed out earlier, this is a guy who didn't go through any training camp, didn't go through any OTAs, has missed 2 weeks already of regular season football. So it's going to take some time for him to get back to game shape and some time for him to gel with the offensive line. That's why I'm not super crazy on the Devonte Freeman hype train like everybody else is, just in terms of waiver wire ads.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm at. So I said like he might be active, but my thought process is he'll kind of just be a body in case something, another injury happens. I don't really see him having a role in the offense because he's not going to know, anything about it. Like he's still going to have to officially sign, pass the COVID test, and then get in there. This is a guy that hasn't taken a snap in a long time. There was nothing about this offense. I just don't see it paying dividends, right off the bat. I think, Dion Lewis is probably the back to own for the Giants, at least for a week.
No, if Devonte Freeman gets like double-digit touches, I'll be very surprised. So we'll see. But my running back, and I already kind of talked about him earlier, so I'll touch upon him a little bit more. Josh Kelly versus the Carolina Panthers this week, owned about 40% of the ESPN leagues. He's not even RB1 for his team. Austin Eckler is averaging 13 fantasy points per game. He still has a standalone value. He's doing very well. He's been a steady part of the Chargers rushing attack, and I really don't see that dissolving anytime soon. For me, this isn't just like a 1 week plug and play. I think this is a move that you can make, and this may pay like big dividends down the road and later in the season. So Josh Kelly, like I said, owning about 40% of ESPN fantasy leagues.
What they're doing with that backfield is kind of like what we thought was going to happen last year with Melvin Gordon holding out. It was like Austin Eckler is going to be the pass catching back and Justin Jackson's going to be like the rundown back. And now they have that, with the emergence of Joshua Kelly. And would that be Jackson this year if he was healthy? I don't know. It didn't work out all that well last year, but this year, like you said, they have 2 running backs that are providing standalone value. What was the difference for him from week 1 to week 2?
Josh Kelly?
Yeah.
Man, I don't know, because he looked pretty decent in week 1 as well. I think it just might have been getting rid of the first game jitters, finally giving some, some rhythm behind him, behind the offensive line, learning a little bit more of the playbook as a rookie, whereas a guy like Austin Eckler was already there in week 1. But, I mean, he's performing phenomenally for a running back, given his role and what they're asking him to do.
Yeah, so 12 points week 1, 13.3 week 2.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that's, and I was going to say the reason I asked that was because I was curious as to what his value would be with Tyrod as opposed to with Justin Herbert. But at least based off those first 2 weeks, it doesn't look like there'd be much of a difference. Yeah. And the next 2 weeks they play Carolina, who's given up the most points to running back so far, and then Tampa Bay, who's given up the 5th most, and then the Jets in a couple more weeks after that. So the matchups are coming up for him to really produce.
Yeah. No, most definitely. I don't see him surpassing Eckler as RB1 because Eckler in his own right looks very good. But Kelly's kind of carving himself out, some nice standalone value in LA right now.
My wide receiver here going to be N'Keal Harry, owning just 27%. Yes, Forks up, Arizona State.
That's right.
Owning just 27% of Yahoo leagues. He has the most targets on the team. He's playing in all 2 wide receiver sets ahead of Julian Edelman. And what we've seen from Cam Newton, who looks like the Cam of old. Their offense hasn't taken a step back after the loss of Tom Brady. If anything, through 2 weeks, it looks like it might even be improved. I mean, Julian Edelman just had his best career regular season game on Sunday Night Football against the Seahawks. So I think N'Keal Harry's role continues to grow. And like I said, if those targets really start to turn into actual receptions, this is a guy that's in for some real fantasy value, provided that Cam Newton stays healthy.
Yeah, so he's actually going to be my wide receiver ad as well. Owned at 45% of ESPN leagues. He had 15 points last week, 18 targets, 32 games. The rapport with Cam Newton is being built week by week. Cam Newton talked about him in training camp, as the two were developing a connection, and that looks legitimate. That looks, 100% validated through the first 2 weeks of the season. I think he's only scratching the surface of what he could do. I still think he's a little bit touchdown dependent. I don't think he can produce 15-point games week to week if he doesn't score. But, man, if he gets his feet underneath him and Cam Newton legitimately starts seeing him as a number one target like he already kind of is, watch out, man. Watch out.
Yeah, I mean, what gives you the optimism is just looking at that target number. You mentioned 18 targets. I mean, that's pretty close to top 5 in the league already. I mean, I mentioned Deonte Johnson was number 3 in the NFL. I think he's at 21, 24, somewhere around there. So it's not that far off. So he is being heavily targeted in that New England passing game. And I see that at least staying consistent, if not going up, as N'Keal Harry just continues to progress. But so we have 2 or 3 of the same. I'm hoping that we're different on the tight end. We don't know it because we don't talk to each other about these things. So it isn't planned when we have the same guys.
We didn't even talk to each other until this morning.
Yeah, true. I had my list done before you texted me to ask if we were for sure doing the show. So my tight end is going to be Logan Thomas of the Washington football team, owned in 32% of leagues. He's second on the team in targets, just behind Terry McLaurin. They faced Cleveland this week, which is a very good matchup for tight ends. Who he's expected to be seeing, who's expected to be covering him. They have some of the worst coverage linebackers in football. I love this matchup for him. This is a guy that is definitely in play for a stream, if you're looking for a streamer at that position. As far as his long-term value, I think you could do better. But at least on short-term notice, I really like Logan Thomas this week.
Yeah, so Logan Thomas was not my tight end. I definitely do see the appeal with him. So, no, big shout out to you for grabbing him. I think you talked about him last week. Jonnu Smith versus the Vikings this week. About 50% of ESPN leagues. I expect that number to shoot up dramatically after the week that he had last week. We talked about whether or not he can kind of fill that Delaney Walker role and be that solidified receiving option that the Titans need, that the Titans need at the tight end position. And he's been that. He's been that everything and more. Granted, some of that production might have come from the absence of A.J. Brown, but, Ryan Tannehill's starting to pick up steam a little bit. And Jonnu Smith, obviously, not only has the tight end one role carved out in Tennessee, but he looks like a legitimate passing option. And the fact that you can get a guy like him on the waiver wire at a, position like the tight end position, position where it's just so top heavy, it could really pay dividends for you throughout the entire year. So, Jonnu Smith, he's a week 3 guy for me, and, he could be a week 14 guy down the road as well. So.
Yeah, I think that he's, short-term and long-term. If you drafted a tight end that really hasn't panned out, maybe you were higher on Austin Hooper coming into the season. You've seen him, only make 4 receptions through the first 2 games, not being heavily targeted, primarily being used as a blocker, and you're ready to make that jump. I think Jonnu Smith is a great way to alleviate that and actually get some value from the tight end position. So I really like that pick. I don't know. So I mentioned I wanted to do some studs and duds. Did you end up going through and okay?
Yeah, so I did studs and duds, but I think you said earlier in the episode that you wanted to talk about, I think you said surprises.
That's essentially what I was. That's what I meant the same thing. I guess I worded it differently to you. I guess stud for me would be a nice surprise, like a guy that was not necessarily projected that high, but ended up overachieving essentially.
Okay.
So yeah, I did one of each by position, and for me, Thursday Night Football, Joe Burrow exceeded expectations, 24.5 fantasy points against Cleveland. It's not that I expected Joe Burrow to have a bad game, but we're talking about a second career start on Thursday Night Football, which is a short week. And I know Cleveland's defense, not necessarily anything to write home against. But again, I attribute it more to the fact that he was, he just played on Sunday to turn around and play on Thursday after a heartbreaking loss and perform the way that he did. And granted, they did not win that football game, but I was still really impressed. I mean, he threw 61 passes without throwing an interception. So Joe Burrow comes in as my stud quarterback of the week, overachieving.
Yeah, so this probably doesn't make a lot of sense, but I had Josh Allen as my stud quarterback versus the Rams. That's a little bit of self-doubt on me. Granted, he is one of the better fantasy quarterback options. 47 points versus a very talented Rams front seven and a highly paid Rams secondary as well. I didn't expect Josh Allen to, exactly get the job done throwing the ball last week. He definitely proved me wrong. Like I said earlier, 47 fantasy points. Granted, I know a lot of people would expect Josh Allen to have decent games week to week, especially with how high the expectations are and where he's being drafted. But just as far as quarterback play goes, he's probably one of the more ones that stick out to me in week two.
Yeah, well, that's the thing about this is it's kind of up for interpretation. What did you find surprising, or who do you think was a stud based off where you thought they'd finish at? So yeah, I mean, I didn't have Josh Allen in my top 5, and he obviously well overachieved that. So it still makes sense to pick that. My dud of the week is going to be Lamar Jackson, scoring 17.5 points, and that's just based off me having him as my QB1 going into the week, and then not finishing inside the top 10. And again, that's more an attribute to game script, getting up on Houston early and getting away from the passing game, just running the ball down their throat for 3.5 quarters pretty much. So 17.5 points for Lamar Jackson. If you picked him, you're obviously putting him in there as your quarterback week to week. And, based off what the rest of your team did, based off what other teams might look like that you're going up against, that very well could have cost you a game, the fact that he scored under 20. So Lamar Jackson is my dud of the week, even though, 17.5 points for some other guys, you'll take that if it's a streaming option. But again, if you're starting Lamar Jackson, you're looking for more than that.
No, definitely. If you're drafting Lamar Jackson in the second or third round, where he was going, I feel like 20 points is probably the standard baseline. Hey, I at least need this out of Lamar every week for where I'm drafting him. And he didn't produce like that. So I would have to share the same beliefs, as you as well. Actually, I did duds for this upcoming week, as in trying to predict duds. So no, I definitely agree with you, just in terms of Lamar not getting it done. If you're interested in those, I did have Matthew Stafford versus the Cardinals this week as one of my potential duds, which is not a guy who's gotten it done, and this is coming from a guy who hyped Matthew Stafford up all the way to hell. So,
okay, well, so you did that for every position then?
Yeah, so I did duds for every position, then I did who I thought was going to be a stud like this upcoming week for every position.
Okay, we'll just hold on to that then, because we can just make that the last thing that we talk about. So I'll just go through the rest of this, and then we'll do, predictive for week 3 and see what happens when we do the next show. If we can make those, well, I don't want to root for guys to do bad, but we'll see if they come true. My stud running back is going to be James Robinson of the Jacksonville Jaguars, scoring 21 points this past week. It was kind of a mystery who was going to take over that Jacksonville backfield with the departure of Leonard Fournette, and I think we have our answer, an undrafted free agent, James Robinson. Like I said, scored 21 points for us. I think we could both agree with this, that Naeem Hines scoring 1.4 points is probably the big disappointment, considering that we were given fantasy advice for people to pick him up due to the expected pass catching role that he would have in that Colts offense with the injury of Marlon Mack, and it just didn't happen, at least this past week. So 1.4 points, that obviously didn't cut it. I was advising some people to play him as a flex play, and that obviously wasn't going to get it done with 1.4. So that's my dud of the week. So I don't know if there's another guy that jumps off the page to you at the top of your head, but based off what we were getting in the YouTube chat last week and advising people to pick him up or play him, I think it's pretty safe to say that we could agree that his 1.4 was a dud.
No, most definitely. And, I feel like every fantasy podcast at least needs a little blemish on their record, when you have a track record, such as ours. All I hear is trophies clinging every time we fire this podcast up. So, we're due to miss, so, oh well.
Beefy just said in here, is Burrow greater than Baker this second?
I would take Joe Burrow right now over Baker Mayfield.
That's the thing. Granted, Baker looked pretty good in that Thursday night game. It's tough to gauge, though, because of how bad Cincinnati is. I still want to see more from him. But, yeah, I'm much more impressed by Joe Burrow going into that game playing the way he did than Baker Mayfield going into that game playing the way he did. We're talking about Joe Burrow making his second career start on a short week, and he looked really good. I mean, and they should have won week 1. I mean, he should be sitting here at least at 1-1.
Yeah.
So yeah, if I'm starting a franchise right now, it's an easy decision. I'm going with Joe Burrow. But even, short term, long term, whatever it might be, to me, I don't see how the answer is Baker Mayfield. I'm still like that Thursday night performance didn't do anything to sway my opinion on him. Like I said, I need to see more. To me, the body of work still greatly swings in the favor of him not living up to the number 1 pick hype, as opposed to him figuring it out magically by having a solid performance on Thursday Night Football against, like you mentioned earlier, the 30th ranked defense in football. So,
yeah, Baker's got a very long uphill trek to kind of reverse all the negative opinions about him. It's going to take years for people to start to believe in him again. I think even if the Browns were to make the playoffs, you'd still have a lot of people kind of wondering whether or not that's Baker or if that's, the weapons around him. But at least at this point, as we talk, I think Joe Burrow looks everything as advertised. Granted, he's on a terrible Cincinnati Bengals team.
that's
Burrow looks everything like I thought he would so far.
Well, that's the thing too, is, take into consideration the supporting cast. I mean, we talk about how good Cleveland should be based off how good they are on paper. And I get Cincinnati has some weapons on that offense too. Granted, I think AJ Green gets hurt every time he runs a route. But Cleveland's offense, what they are on paper, I mean, that should be amongst the top in football. I mean, you have 2 running backs that are both top 10 talents. You have 2 wide receivers that are in the top 20 in football. I mean, there's just too much firepower there for Baker to not be an elite quarterback, and he's not. So, I mean, if you put Joe Burrow in that situation, I mean, my God, I am very afraid of the Cleveland Browns if those quarterbacks switch spots.
No, I completely agree. So it's only a matter of time before the Bengals start to piece together a competent team around Joe Burrow. But I feel like some of the building blocks are already there for him.
My stud wide receiver, and even though it was somewhat expected, we touched on already, but I wasn't expecting 29.9 points from Mr. Calvin Ridley of the Atlanta Falcons. Like we mentioned, kind of taking over, at least to this point, that fantasy wide receiver 1 value from Julio Jones. And we'll see if it continues. We both have him higher this week than Julio Jones. So we expect that to continue. I'm not going to predict him to score 30 points, but he's my stud of last week for doing so. And my dud is going to be a guy I put in my top 5. Alvin Robinson scoring just 6.3 points. Really expected a lot more. And again, I know that his play, he's kind of tied to Mitch Trubisky. If he doesn't have a good game, Alvin Robinson's going to be hard-pressed to have a good game. But scoring just 6.3 points for a guy I had in my top 5, he's easily my dud of the week at that position.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I can't disagree with anything you just said, especially Calvin Ridley, being one of the studs of the week at the wide receiver position. We're obviously both very, very high on him. So
my stud tight end is a guy that I was advising people late in the week when we found out for sure that George Kittle was going to be inactive to pick up. It's going to be Jordan Reed scoring 24 points for San Fran. I mean, not getting talked about a lot, but that is a very feel-good thing for football. Jordan Reed, who was one of the best tight ends just a couple of years ago when he was able to be on the field, unfortunately, he was never on the field. I mean, he's just not been healthy. Signed a cheap deal with the 49ers to play 2 tight end sets. George Kittle goes down, makes him the new number 1 tight end, and he goes out and scores 2 touchdowns this past week. So, he's my stud at that position. My dud is going to be Mark Andrews going back to the Baltimore offense. Just their passing game not doing much. Just 3.9 points. Obviously, that's not good enough for Mark Andrews. That's the difference between winning and losing games with what he was projected to score and what he actually scored. So he's going to be my dud of the week at the tight end position.
Yeah, Mark Andrews, you definitely, if we're hyping him up as like tight end number 3 behind Kittle and Kelsey and putting him in that, kind of category, you do need to produce every week like those 2 do. So for him to kind of come out and, granted, we already talked about it, game script and just kind of how the game evolved and, there weren't a whole lot of passing opportunities, but still at the end of the day, you're putting him in the line to score fantasy points and he didn't exactly do that. So.
Beefy just brought up an interesting point. He doesn't think Baker would be as scrutinized if he weren't the number 1 overall pick.
I think he would just because of his personality, just because of how loud he was coming out of college. I think had he gone anywhere, then he would have been kind of scrutinized like he was. Also, during his rookie year, he did make not like a lot of comments, but just a lot of things that he did or he said kind of suggested that he was going to be the guy to take the Browns back to whatever promised land they think they're owed. And he just hasn't produced yet. But, Baker's a loud guy. He's an outspoken guy. I guess we see that through his commercials on TV now. He has more commercials and touchdown passes this year. So I think regardless of wherever he would have been scrutinized like he is.
Yeah, I mean, he's the face of what's supposed to be a turnaround for that organization. And we hear it all the time, but this was really supposed to be the one. I mean, they invested so much in this, going out and getting Odell Beckham Jr. and just trying to completely reshape that, spending money in free agency, taking care of both tackle spots this year. I mean, the trade for obviously Jarvis Landry when they traded for him, it's supposed to be a completely different Cleveland Browns team. And the quarterback position, the most important position, they tabbed him as the guy when he took over his rookie year and, lit the league on fire at that point. But actually, when he was given the reins the first full offseason as a starter, went into last year that way, knowing he was going to be the starter, put everything in place for him to succeed, and he didn't. I mean, and even more so this year, because now, like I said, last year, the offensive line, there were still some question marks about. Okay, they took care of that. They went and got Jedrick Wills in the draft, and they signed Jack Conklin, the big money in free agency. They also went and got a big money tight end. Everything is there for him to succeed. And if he still doesn't do it, he's going to be on his way out because he's in year three. Year three is always the biggest year for first-round picks because you got to decide about that fifth-year option. So, he's got to either – ball out and help them make that decision to pick up the fifth-year option, or he's not going to. They're going to decline it, and depending on where the draft position is, maybe they move on as quickly as next year.
Yeah, and I feel like there's always been that excuse for the Browns where it's like, okay, they don't have this or they don't have that, and they've addressed their fair share of problems. Not everything's perfect in Cleveland right now, but the front office has done a decent job of putting weapons around Baker, but Baker's been the common denominator there. Whether it's been coaches, players, whatever it is, Baker's the common denominator in the Browns not going back to the playoffs. He should have taken them to by now. If we're going off the fans' expectations and probably the franchise's expectations as well. So yeah, it's a little unfair to him, but at the same time, he kind of brought a lot of it on himself. So we'll see.
Yeah, Sarge said Darren Waller knows stud tight end what gives. He was a stud, but he was an expected stud. The stud that I'm listing is a guy that overachieved where we expected him to be. So that's why Jordan Reed fits that category more, is because Darren Waller, we expected him to ball out. So, Donnie, like I said, I wanted to wrap up with what you had. You're forecasting week 3 studs and duds.
Yeah. So I completely misinterpreted the text you sent me.
That's fine. It's better. It means more content.
So my studs for this upcoming week, I already talked about Josh Allen a little bit versus the Rams defense. Austin Eckler versus the Carolina Panthers defense, who you said gave up most points towards running backs for week 1 and week 2. So I think he's in line for a very big day. And just to preface this, all of the studs, I try to pick guys outside of my top 5. So I guess I'll do a better job trying to find diamonds in the rough next week. But Amari Cooper versus the Seahawks is going to be my stud receiver of the week. I feel like it could be him, Gallup, or CeeDee Lamb, just depending on the matchup, depending on how it goes. I feel like all 3 of those guys can kind of evolve, and I feel like one of those 3 will have a big game. It's just kind of a dice roll to see who it is. Tight end, the stud of the week is going to be Mike Gesicki versus the Jaguars. You're obviously super high on him. I am as well. Just didn't put him in my top 5, but man, people were hyping him up as a sleeper this year, sleeper tight end, and he's delivered so far. So we'll see if he can continue that. Dud quarterback is going to be Matthew Stafford versus the Cardinals. Return to week 2, it didn't look all that great. He's still without Kenny Golladay, but Golladay is expected to return this week versus a very much improved Cardinals defense. The secondary looks pretty solid. Just paid Budda Baker. Isaiah Simmons is roaming around at that safety and linebacker hybrid role. Patrick Peterson obviously still there as well. So I just don't think Stafford and Lions can get it done, at least on the fantasy points gridiron. Dud of the week, this might surprise you, Derrick Henry versus the Minnesota Vikings. Only 8 fantasy points last week. They gave him a bunch of touches, didn't really do anything with it. Only got 80 yards on the ground, no end zone scored versus, not inferior fantasy defense, but going up against the Vikings front seven this week, not exactly ideal. So we'll see how that pans out. I definitely think the Titans switch to more of an aerial passing attack, and that's where, my belief in Ryan Tannehill comes from. Dud receiver of the week, Tyreek Hill versus the Baltimore Ravens, and that's a big one. That's a very, very big one because all it takes is one play to make me look like a clown after saying this, but we'll see.
Have to edit it onto the screen next week if so.
Oh yeah, dude, Haley loves that. But no, I just think Baltimore's secondary is probably the best in the league. Baltimore's coaching staff does a really good job of putting them in positions to succeed. And yeah, I just think Tyreek Hill is going to have a quiet night come Monday night. And then tight end dud of the week to kind of wrap everything up, Evan Ingram versus the San Francisco 49ers. Man, how disappointing has he been? I drafted him thinking I was going to have a nice little 1-2 between him and Hayden Hurst. And, Ingram just hasn't done it yet. Sterling Shepard's going to be coming back, so you can expect targets to be even more split up between those two, even with a guy like Saquon Barkley out. So, yeah, I was originally high on a guy like Evan Ingram, but through 2 weeks of football, I'm not so convinced now.
I feel like it's not all that high profile, but for me at least, he's probably up there for like one of my biggest what ifs in football right now. Because the potential is there. It's just, that's all we keep talking about is the potential. And eventually that doesn't matter.
He's like the Browns.
True. Okay, so actually, I said we we're going to wrap up with that, but we're going to wrap up with a couple questions that we just got asked. Beefy once again said, so I guess my next question would be, even though he doesn't talk like Baker, if Burrow doesn't bring the Bengals to the playoffs within the first 4 years, will he be treated somewhat similarly? Now, I guess the difference is going to be, are the Bengals doing everything in their power? Do we feel like they're putting the best team on paper in football around him? Are they getting the weapons, the supporting cast, like they've done with Baker in Cleveland? Are they going to take care of that offensive line, which you would think is going to be what they heavily go to and target in the draft next year and free agency, whatever it might be? That has to be the Bengals' next priority. You've spent that first overall pick on a quarterback. Now you got to protect him because you already got the running back. You paid him. Tyler Boyd, even if AJ Green's not back there, is a solid enough weapon. We'll see what happens with Auden Tate, who's a guy that I was high on, but apparently he's like requested a trade now. He doesn't see his fit in that offense. And then obviously, John Ross is there. He's whatever. He's just fast. But, I'm not sure. They still definitely could use a couple more weapons. But I guess what I'm getting at is if we feel like they are doing the exact same thing as the Browns and putting Joe Burrow in the best possible situation and he's still not succeeding, you feel like he's the reason that the team is being held back, then yeah, I think that, by year 3, like I said, that's the biggest year for, for first rounders. That's when we're going to start having that conversation because that's when you got to start thinking about, are they going to pick up the 5th-year option? Is it time to move on? Are they going to decline the 5th-year option, but maybe like try to already, rework a new deal? We typically, if he's good enough, we'll probably see an extension before that 5th-year option. But again, year 3, easily the most important year for these first round guys. I don't think that that's the case, I don't see that being any different in Burrow's case as opposed to Baker's. So yeah, I guess what it just comes down to is we feel like the Browns are a good team on paper and Baker Mayfield is potentially what's holding them back. If we feel that same way about Burrow, then yeah, we will have that same conversation.
Yeah, we'll have to see. You have to remember that these teams picking number one for a reason. They're not a good football team. One rookie quarterback isn't going to come in and just magically change everything. It's going to take changes on both sides of the ball at the other 21 positions on the football field in order for that team to turn around and be successful. So I think it's ultimately all up to the front office to make sure your pieces are in place. But at the same time, it does depend on a lot of the quarterback growth, the quarterback development. And I feel like, 4 years from now, we'll know if Joe Burrow is a good quarterback or not. It's not hard to look at a guy and be like, okay, well, we see what he's being held back by. But if you look at the film, he's throwing the balls in the right places. He's making the right reads. He's making the right checks. It's just the people around him are failing him. So
again, second career start on a short week, 61 pass attempts, no interceptions. No. So that, to me, Burrow's already showing good signs. I will, again, I'm not handing him, the keys already or anything like that because we saw what Baker Mayfield came in and did right away. And then we saw the regression in year 2. And I know a lot of people want to blame the coaching staff. It is what it is. But again, it's way too early to, in my opinion, to have that conversation, obviously. But if I'm picking a quarterback right now, it's obviously going to be Joe Burrow. The last question, Sarge asked, can I get some advice on Drew Brees by chance? He has stunk so far, and I don't know what to do. Good old noodle arm Drew Brees. Well, he's missing his best weapon in Michael Thomas, which is obviously, harmful to his fantasy value. This is a guy that I did not view, though, as a number one option in fantasy anymore, even with Michael Thomas. So, I think that if you drafted Drew Brees, I don't remember who Sarge their quarterback is. If you drafted Drew Brees, you're probably going to have him in your lineup every single week. But to me, I mean, just me personally, I would be looking at other options. I mentioned Ryan Tannehill, who's owned in just 46% of the leagues. I would rather have him in my lineup than Drew Brees right now. It would take Drew Brees going out there, and obviously, once he gets Michael Thomas back, that could very well change. But it would take Drew Brees going out there and proving me wrong for me to say that I can trust him in my lineup again. And it's crazy to say about Drew Brees, but we're not talking about, a young Drew Brees anymore, lighting it up in the dome. We're talking about a 40-year-old who's really just in charge of getting the ball to the playmakers. And, when that doesn't happen in a game like yesterday against the Raiders, he's not going to give you much fantasy value.
No, I'm right there with you. If you drafted Drew Brees, you likely got him late, and you likely drafted another quarterback around where you got him, just to have that bona fide 1-2 punch if you needed to pull a guy like Drew Brees out. I'm completely agreeing with you. I think I would rather roll the dice on a guy like Ryan Tannehill and have Drew Brees prove me wrong. Then I'd feel a lot more comfortable putting Drew Brees back in the lineup.
His other quarterback is Kirk Cousins, who right now is considered the worst quarterback in 2020.
Yeah. I'd rather have Brees in there than Kirk Cousins, but man, Ryan Tannehill, 40% of ESPN leagues, go grab him.
Yeah, I think there's better options out there for you, honestly. Yeah, I'm not saying to drop Drew Brees. I would keep him around on your bench and just hope that, the New Orleans offense starts to pick it back up, especially if Michael Thomas comes back sooner than expected, because I think that he, unlocks that potential for Drew Brees to go from, a guy that's sitting on your bench to a guy that you can have as a viable QB1 option. But yeah, I mean, Kirk Cousins definitely isn't the answer. I would look, maybe it even going week by week. We've talked about streaming quarterbacks before, and there's definitely the opportunity to do so. Is people that go 0 QB league, QB drafts, and then just stream them. A guy like Gardner Minshew could provide value for you on a good week, just based off matchups. And I don't know what else is out there, but again, Ryan Tannehill right now owned in just 46% of leagues. That's a guy that I would target. If you let us know who the guys are at the top. Okay. Somebody else asked, should I start Devonte Parker, Deonte Johnson, or Odell Beckham Jr.? My answer here.
Deonte.
One of those guys in my top 5.
Yeah, I would have to go Deonte. Devonte Parker, at least for me, is just a little bit iffy right now, just in terms of his week-to-week production. You already pointed out Deontay Johnson, 3rd in the league in targets, going up against the Texans secondary, where he should eat yet again. Odell, obviously the bigger name. We know he can produce, but I feel like he's big play dependent, whereas a guy like Deontay Johnson is consistently going to get fed the ball, and he can make a big play happen off of any catch. So,
yeah, I mean, that's obviously my answer too, being that he is my wide receiver 5 this week. Odell Beckham Jr. would be second on that list for me. And then Devonte Parker. Devonte Parker dealing with a little bit of a hamstring injury, also playing on the short week this upcoming Thursday against the Jacksonville Jaguars, which is not a great matchup. But C.J. Henderson has been one of the top rookies in all of football, let alone rookie corners. He's been the best. So I like him quite a bit, and I think that's probably who would match up with Devonte Parker, so I don't love that matchup for him. Deontay Johnson, I think, has a big day against Houston, so I think that that's a great play. So I guess I would rank up Deontay Johnson, OBJ, and then Devonte Parker, and I believe that you would have them the same way. So I'm playing DJ out of those 3. Someone said, thoughts on possibly trading Ben for a higher value running back or wide receiver? My other QB is Russ Wilson. I mean, if you can do that, I've come to find that there's not a whole lot of people willing to trade for a quarterback for the reasons that we just mentioned. If they don't have one that can get similar production on their roster, they'll probably just stream them. So, you're not going to typically find a trade partner for a guy like Ben Roethlisberger, who started off relatively well, at least from a real life perspective. But I don't know that his fantasy value is necessarily there. I don't know how many teams are in this league. I don't know if it's a just one or two QB league. I don't know that the value is definitely going to be there for the other person. But hey, if you can trade him and get a running back or receiver that you feel like you can play as an RB2 or a wide receiver 2 or a flex option, I mean, hell yeah, do that 7 days out of the week. So
definitely, yeah. If you can find a Steelers fan who really, really wants Ben Roethlisberger in your league, and you can get back some valuable wide receiver like running back depth, absolutely do it. Yeah, and like you said, there's not a whole lot of people that are willing to give up a lot of capital to get a quarterback in return. So if you can do that, then absolutely.
So the quarterbacks that Sarge could target, as opposed to playing Drew Brees every week, we're looking at Gardner Minshew. Justin Herbert's available, but we don't know what's going on with him anyway. Baker Mayfield, Ryan Tannehill, Phillip Rivers, Jared Goff, Joe Burrow, Fitzpatrick, Trubisky, Haskins, Carr, Bridgewater. I know where I'm at with this, to be honest.
I'd go Tannehill. Minshew wouldn't be a bad play either. I almost picked Gardner Minshew to be my waiver wire pickup of the week, but I still think Tannehill is probably my top guy out of that list.
There's something that's enticing to me about both Goff and Burrow, though, too. I mean, what I'm getting from this, though, is I would definitely be picking one of these guys up and plugging them in over Drew Brees without Michael Thomas.
Yeah.
And I think it would be just based off matchup. I don't think that these guys are going to be getting picked up either. So I think you could kind of have like all these guys on your roster at some point. Nobody else is going to be doing this strategy because most people have have their quarterback set. So yeah, I mean, it's not a desirable situation. I know it's even worse for Sarge because he drafted Cam Newton, but he had the same bye week as Drew Brees, so he dropped him and picked up Kirk Cousins. So he was kind of in a bad spot right from the start, but obviously Cam Newton would be nice to have on his roster right now. Somebody else came in here and said, drop Stafford for Minshew, ? So I know
I feel like it's too early to give up hope on Matthew Stafford because we haven't seen everything put together quite yet. If there's another quarterback, I'd probably drop them instead, just depending on like who it is.
Yeah, I'm not. I know that you're kind of fading Stafford for this week, but I don't think that we've seen the best of him in 2020 yet. As we mentioned, hasn't gotten Kenny Golladay yet. So I think that his play will pick back up. And I think that, I'd rather have Matthew Stafford in that offense as opposed to Gardner Minshew with his limited weapons at Jacksonville. Granted, he's doing everything he can with that team. I'll take Matthew Stafford, though.
Yeah, and it's so easy to kind of have these like knee-jerk reactions after 2 weeks of football. You start to panic if you start 0-2 or 1-1 or anything like that. You just have to remember it's a long season, especially with no preseason. It's going to take these guys a little bit more time to gel than usual. I still have faith in Stafford, as a season in whole. It's just I don't love his matchup this week. So,
right. Me either. All right. Well, Breeze is my other. I don't really want to drop him. Imagine not getting Josh Allen in the 6th round. Talk about value. Or 8th round. I'm sorry. Facts. All right. Well, I'll give you guys about another minute to see if you guys have anything else while I read our ad for Teach Barbershop. Teach Barbershop. It is an old-fashioned barbershop. It is located at 180 Brighton Avenue in Rochester, PA. He's open 11 to 7 Tuesday through Friday and 9 to 4 on Saturday. Every Tuesday, he has $5 off for military personnel, first responders, and nurses. Again, Teach Barbershop, 180 Brighton Avenue in Rochester, PA. Donnie, do you have anything else?
I don't know. Let's hope to rebound just in terms of not giving people Naeem Hines fantasy advice.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, wait. One last thing I wanted to mention on here. I don't know how many times I brought it up on here. I know I brought it up at least once, but I mean to bring it up on every episode. Our Rocking Around the 412 is going on right now, and it will be going on till the second weekend of December. If you have questions about what we do, to give you a little bit of a rundown, we've started a fundraiser, and this is the 3rd year, where we raise money to provide Christmas for families who otherwise would not be able to. We buy the kids of those families everything that they want for Christmas, make their Christmas dreams come true. Luckily for us, we've been pretty fortunate throughout our lives, and we've never had to deal with any of that, but we know what, from experience and people around us, we know what those circumstances can be like. And we know that especially in 2020, that could be even magnified even more. There's families that weren't expecting to have that financial burden, and they do. So yeah, Rock Around the 412, year 3, it's officially going on. If you donate at least $20, you're going to be eligible for some really cool stuff. I think we got more prizes this year than any other year. Actually, I have them all on my phone, so let me read off some of the stuff that we got going on. Tickets to a future Pittsburgh Penguin game when fans are allowed to go back in 2025. No, I'm kidding. Tickets to a future Pittsburgh Pirates game, a Kevin Newman jersey, an autographed Minka Fitzpatrick jersey, an autographed Jack Ham pylon, an autographed Benny Snell 8x10, an autographed Juju football, 2 autographed Joe Musgrove baseballs, and an autographed Brian Russ puck. So I think that that's more prizes than we've had in the past. We're super excited about it. We're expecting to be able to hit our total and raise more money than we have in year 1 and year 2. And this should be thanks to you guys. You guys have already shown out a ton, but we're excited about it. So Beefy also wanted me to mention one more time to go to manscaped.com, put a bunch of stuff in your cart, and use the code 412 at checkout for 20% off, plus free shipping. So not only are you getting 20% off, that's also going to ship to you for free. Donnie, this has been a lot of fun. I wish you the best of luck.
It always is. I always enjoyed the ad reads and fantasy perspective.
I know, man. There's times where it's hard not to laugh, but I got to take this very seriously.
Shout out to everybody in the chat too. I love the questions during the pod.
Yeah, it's definitely gotten more interactive this year, doing it in year 2 as opposed to year 1. So yeah, shout out to everybody that watches this. Shout out to everybody that listens back. If you do listen back, head on over to the YouTube and hit that subscribe and notification bell so you can all come be a part and interact with us as we're doing it. We can answer some questions for you to help guide you to some wins. Other than that, thanks for listening to Around the 412. This has been a presentation of Crowworthy, where winners are serving winners coast to coast with sports, gambling, and more. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Around the 412. Follow me at Z23Smitty. That's Donnie Druin. Follow Crowworthy. Visit the Pittsburgh City page at crowworthy.com for podcasts like this one, all the blogs, all the gambling advice, and more. We'll talk to you next week. Good luck. Bye-bye.